Welcome to the Leadership RIOT, Real Issues, Overdue Truths. I'm Rose.
And I'm Dominique.
I think it's pretty fair to say that no one goes looking for a job with a shitty culture, but knowing how to get the real answers about culture is what helps you make the right decisions for yourself and your team.
Our last episode, we focused on who owns culture, and that really got us thinking, how do you actually spot it? What is the real culture when you're interviewing, for a job or a candidate? Because it's not the polished answers, and it's definitely not the values page on the website, and it's not even Glassdoor. So how do you go deeper? How do you really understand what it's like to work somewhere?
On the flip side, if you're a hiring leader, how do you get the real read from a candidate and how they think about culture beyond the typical rehearsed answers?
Right. And that's what today's episode is all about. We're sharing a few interview questions we've used as candidates and as hiring leaders to help you suss out what's really going on beneath the surface. Because culture questions are a lot like that weaknesses question we all get asked. It's pretty easy to turn the answer into something that actually sounds positive. So welcome to the riot.
All right, Dom, let's jump into episode 2. Are you good with me kicking us off?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. So this one's a bit of a wild card, but it works for me every time. I ask this question in interviews: what pisses you off?
Wow, straight in there.
I leave it completely open-ended. And when I'm a candidate, I'm not just listening for the answer. I'm watching the reaction, the body language. Do they flinch? Do they laugh, nervous laugh especially? Do they dodge it? Or are they actually lean in? Because, in that moment, there's something, getting real. And I can see that they're not just performing. Inevitably, every single time, the first thing they say to me is like, wow, I've never been asked that before.
And it's a really hard one to fake.
Exactly. And I ask the same question when I'm interviewing candidates as well, because their answer tells you how they're wired, what gets under their skin. Are they really bugged by the small stuff or the big stuff? Do they show self-awareness in some way? Or do they reveal something that, makes me pause and I want to, direct more questions to get more insight into those areas? And then I always ask the same simple follow-up question: tell me more, to get deeper.
And it's such a good culture signal too.
Totally. It cuts through those rehearsed answers that we've all used. It shows you, how people actually, what they experience and tolerate inside an organization. And you start to hear where the friction lives, like what gets normalized and how people handle tension. Even like you get the emotional tone of the place too.
Right. Absolutely. And what people complain about is usually what's broken or at least what's accepted.
For sure. And I thought I would share here, if somebody asked me this question, which I've never been asked, by the way, but here's how I might answer it. I get frustrated when I'm in an organization where there's no accountability, there's no ownership. Finger pointing never fixes anything in my view. And in my RevOps roles, I'm all about improving processes and removing needless frustrations. So, Dom, if I asked you that question, what pisses you off? Well, how would you answer it?
Yeah, that's a tough one, and I've never been asked it either. I would probably say something like lack of attention to detail, because we all know that drives me crazy. Or, people being hired for their expertise and then not listening to them. And I want to build on that and then tie it back to our last episode. One of my favorites is what have you done or what do you do to influence culture in your organization? And that works both ways. Candidates should ask it, and hiring leaders should also ask it as well.
100%, it really does force ownership.
Exactly. And a variation I really like asking as well is who owns culture in your organization? That tells you instantly whether people actually understand their role in culture or whether they just think it's someone else's job.
That kind of links nicely to our first episode on who owns culture, too. So, if the answer to that question is HR, you've learned something really important about the organization's philosophy and culture ownership.
Yeah, that's really important. There's another angle that I like as well, and it's what do you care deeply about? Or what are your non-negotiables? Or what are your soapboxes is another one, because that tells you where someone will or won't compromise.
And, I can see where, that's where culture shows up, in all those trade-offs.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, so here's a question that I'm sure we've all heard, whether we've asked it or whether we have been asked it as a candidate. And it's like, what type of culture are you looking for? And honestly, to me, this one feels like a little bit of a trap because, first of all, most people answer it based on their past experiences, whether they were good or bad. And that's useful, but I'm not always convinced that interviewers always respond honestly. I mean, no hiring manager is actually going to tell you you should run and run really fast.
Right. Like no one is sitting there saying, yeah, we're not that, or thinking in their head, oh, wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah, I mean, it is a helpful question, but it doesn't always get you to the truth. So this is where sometimes you have to be a little bit brave, ask things like, do leaders here actually do the right thing? How is conflict handled? How are toxic behaviors addressed?
Or what about what does someone need to do to be successful here, or who tends to struggle and why? I think that would be very, very revealing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, this one, what behaviors get rewarded here, even if they're not officially recognized. Because for me, that's the real culture, not what's written. It's what's being reinforced. And as a hiring leader, I also see the opportunity to flip it. So you can ask things like, what environment brings out your best work? Or what frustrates you at work? And then how do you handle it? I'm going to be looking here for patterns, not perfect answers.
For sure. I think the big thing here is that, culture isn't a one size fits all. It's not even close. We're all looking for something different. It really depends on, what somebody values in culture is different depending on where they are in their career or their life.
Yeah, and priorities shift. So what works for one person might not work for another. What worked for me 20 years ago might not work for me now. The goal isn't about finding a perfect culture. It's about finding the right fit for you.
For sure. So if there's one takeaway today, I think it's this: don't ask the safer questions in an interview. Ask the truer ones. Culture isn't what people say when they're comfortable. It's what comes out when they're challenged.
Absolutely. And this is about going beyond the script. So ask for examples, really sit in the pauses. Pay attention to what's not said, because that's often where the real story lies. And whether you're interviewing for a role or you're hiring for your team, you're not just evaluating skills. You're deciding what kind of environment you're stepping into or you're creating.
And I think we've all experienced this. Like, interviews are very different now. They're not the one-off interviews. There's a series of touch points. You meet a lot of people now, sometimes up to 6 meetings. And when you get to ask better questions, the gaps between the touch points and the answers from the people you meet will tell you everything you need to know about culture. So, Dom, we're at the end of another episode of the Leadership Riot.
Thank you for being part of the riot with us today. We will be back again to stir things up even more.
See you at the next riot.